guys. Well, we found out some new information, which is after about 8 minutes, my phone seems to like catch on fire. So we're going to try this again. We're going to finish the introduction tonight. Then we're going to stop, try to upload that one. Then I'm going to read The Skin I'm In. We're going to stop and try to upload that one. And then we'll read the kids' books. Okay? This is all purely conjecture. We're hoping it works. Okay, so I'm going to start here in night. And so I persevered and trusted the silence that envelops the transcending words, knowing all the while that any one of the fields of ashes in Birkenau carries more weight than all the testimonies about Birkenau. For despite all my attempts to articulate the unspeakable, it is still not right. Is that why my manuscript, written in Yiddish as The World Remains Silent and translated first into French and then into English, was rejected by every major publisher, French and American, despite the tireless efforts of the great Catholic French writer and Nobel laureate Franco Marek. After months and months of personal visits, letters, and telephone calls, he finally succeeded in getting it into print. Though I made numerous cuts, the original Yiddish version was still long. Jerome Lindon, the legendary head of the small but prestigious Editions des Minutes, edited and further cut the French version. I accepted his decision because I was worried that some things might be superfluous. Substance alone mattered. I was more afraid of having said too much than too little. Example, in the Yiddish version, the narrative opens with these cynical musings. In the beginning there was faith, which is childish, trust which is vain, and illusion, which is dangerous. We believe in God, trusted in man, and lived with the illusion that everyone has been entrusted with a sacred spark from the Shekinah's flame, that every one of us carries in his eyes and his soul a reflection of God's image. That was the source, if not the cause, of all of our ordeals. So original passages from the original Yiddish text had more on the death of my father and on the liberation. Why not include those in this new translation? Too personal, too private. Perhaps they needed to remain between the lines, and yet I remember the night, the most horrendous night of my life. Eliezer, my son, come here. I want to tell you something, only to you. Don't leave me alone. Come, don't. Eliezer, I heard his voice, grasped the meaning of his words and the tragic dimension of the moment, yet I did not move. It had been his last wish to have me next to him in his agony, at the moment when his soul was tearing itself from his lacerated body, yet I did not let him have his wish. I was afraid of the blows. That was why I remained deaf to his cries. Instead of sacrificing my miserable life and rushing to his side, taking his hand, reassuring him, showing him that he was not abandoned, that I was near him, that I felt his sorrow, instead of all that, I remained flat on my back, asking God to make my father stop calling my name, to make him stop crying. So afraid was I to incur the wrath of the SS. In fact, my father was no longer conscious. Yet his plaintive, harrowing voice went on piercing the silence and calling me. Nobody but me. Well, the SS had flown into a rage and was striking my father on the head. Be quiet, old man, be quiet. My father had no longer felt the club's blows. I did. And yet I did not react. I let the SS beat my father. I left him alone in the clutches of death. Worse, I was angry with him for having been noisy, for having cried, for having provoked the wrath of the SS. Eliezer, don't leave me. Come, don't leave me alone. His voice had reached me from far away, and so close that I had not moved. I shall never forgive myself, nor shall I ever forgive the world for having pushed me against the wall, for having turned me into the stranger, for having awakened in me the basest, most primitive instincts. His last word had been my name, a summons, and I had not responded. Okay. And in the Yiddish version, the narrative does not end with the image in the mirror, but with a gloomy meditation on the present. And now, scarcely 10 years after Buchenwald, I realize that the world quickly forgets. Today, Germany is a sovereign state. The German army has been resuscitated. Ilse Koch, the notorious sadistic monster of Buchenwald, was allowed to have children and live happily ever after. War criminals stroll through the streets of Hamburg and Munich, The past seems to have been erased and relegated to oblivion. Today, there are anti Semites in Germany, France, and even the United States who tell the world that the story of 6 million assassinated Jews is nothing but a hoax, and many people, not knowing any better, may well believe them. If not today, then tomorrow or the day after. I'm not so naive as to believe that this slim volume will change the course of history or shake the conscience of the world. Books no longer have the power they once did. Those who kept silent yesterday will remain silent tomorrow. The reader would be entitled to ask, why this new translation? Since the earlier one had been around for 45 years. If it is not faithful nor good enough, why did I wait so long to replace it with one better and closer to the original? In response, I would say only that back then I was an unknown writer who was just getting published. My English was far from good. When my British publisher told me that he had found a translator, I was pleased. I later read the translation and it seemed all right. I never reread it. Since then, many of my other works have been translated by Marion, my wife, who knows my voice and how to transmit it better than anyone else. I am fortunate. When Farrar or Strauss or Gouraud asked her to prepare a new translation, she accepted. I am convinced that the readers will appreciate her work. In fact, as a result of her rigorous editing, I was able to correct and revise a number of important details. And so, as I reread this text written so long ago, I am glad that I did not wait any longer. And yet I still wonder, have I used the right words? I speak of the first night over there, the discovery of the reality inside the barbed wire, the warnings of a veteran inmate counseling my father and myself to lie about our ages. My father was to make himself younger and I older. The selection, the march toward the chimneys looming in the distance under an indifferent sky, the infants thrown into fiery ditches. I did not say that they were alive, but that was what I thought. But then I convinced myself, no, they were dead, otherwise I surely would have lost my mind. And yet fellow inmates also saw them. They were alive when they were thrown into the flames. Historians among the Telford Taylor confirmed it, and yet somehow I did not lose my mind. Before concluding this introduction, I believe it is important to emphasize how strongly I feel that books, just like people, have a destiny. Some invite sorrow, others joy, and some both. Earlier I described the difficulties encountered by Night before its publication in French 47 years ago. Despite overwhelmingly favorable reviews, the book sold poorly. The subject was considered morbid and interested no one. If a rabbi happened to mention the book in his sermon, there were always people ready to complain that it was senseless to burden our children with the tragedies of the Jewish past. Since then, much has changed. Night has been received in ways I had never expected. Today, students in high schools and colleges in the United States and elsewhere read it as part of their curriculum. How to explain this phenomenon? First of all, there has been a powerful change in the public's attitude. In the 50s and 60s, adults born before or during World War II showed a careless and patronizing indifference toward what is so inadequately called the Holocaust. But that is no longer true. Back then, few publishers had the courage to publish books on this subject. Today, such works are on most book lists. The same is true in academia. Back then, few schools offered courses on the subject. Today, many do. And strangely, those courses are particularly popular. The topic of Auschwitz has become part of mainstream culture. There are films, plays, novels, international conferences, exhibitions, annual ceremonies with the participation of the nation's officialdom. The most striking example is that of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. It has received more than 22 million visitors since its inauguration in 1993. This may be because the public knows that the number of survivors is shrinking daily and is fascinated by the idea of sharing memories that will soon be lost. For in the end, it is all about memory, its sources and its magnitude, and, of course, its consequences. For the survivors who chooses to testify, it is clear his duty is to bear witness for the dead and for the living. He has no right to deprive future generations of a past that belongs to our collective memory. To forget would not only be dangerous, but offensive. To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time. Sometimes I'm asked if I know the response to Auschwitz. I answer that not only do I not know it, but that I don't even know if a tragedy of this magnitude has a response. What I do know is that there is a response in responsibility. When we speak of this era of evil and darkness, so close and yet so distant, responsibility is the key word. To witness has forced myself to testify. For the youth of today, for the children who will be born tomorrow, he does not want his past to become their future. Elie Wiesel. Okay, so we're going to keep reading this. I want you to look up some things about maybe Auschwitz, about the Holocaust, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.